Good morning. Glad to see everybody here this morning. We're studying in 1 Corinthians, the 9th chapter. And last Sunday we were discussing verses 4 through 6, where we were starting to discuss support for the apostles. And Paul was having a little dissertation on, the things that the apostles had the right to do, but the apostles didn't do them for the good of the cause. And we discussed a little bit about some of the apostles obviously were married and Paul wasn't, and that was his choice. It wasn't that it was demanded of him as an apostle, but it was his choice to do things that way, and it was good for the cause, and it in some ways made his job a little bit easier. And so we're going to kind of continue on today, starting with verse 7, and we're going to talk a little bit about the support of the apostles and generally the support of anybody who is full time in the work of the Lord. So before we go any further, I'd like for Philip Daniels, if you would, to lead our minds in prayer.
Father, we're thankful for blessings of life. We're thankful, Father, for the opportunity to be here once again to study your word. We're thankful for the night's rest. We're thankful for the opportunity to be here once again. We pray, Father, for all those who cannot be with us because of sickness. We pray, Father, for all those in foreign lands that are being persecuted this hour. Be with them and strengthen them and encourage them as only you can. Forgive us the things we do wrong. We ask in Jesus' name. Amen.
Okay, so let's start at verse 7. And he says, "What soldier ever serveth at his own charges, who planteth a vineyard and eateth not the fruit thereof, or who feedeth a flock and eateth not the milk of the flock?" So basically what Paul's saying here in verse 7 is that a soldier has the right to receive support from the people that he serves, and that he shouldn't have to pay his own way to do the job, and the people who are that he is serving should support him and supply him with the things that that he needs to do the job. And in this day and time, this was common knowledge. I mean, they've been fighting wars long before Paul wrote this, and usually to fight a war you've got to have ground troops, and you can't. Of course, they didn't have air power back then, but people would enlist in the army as soldiers, and they expected to be supported. And history tells us, like in Rome, not only did they pay their people, but they also had some cities where when the soldiers' term of duty was up and they were ready to retire, they had a city that they could go and retire to, and the government would support them for all the things that they had done for the government. So the point that Paul's making here in this first part is that any man who goes into the world to be a soldier for Jesus, and that's his full-time occupation, should have the support of the church. And we briefly discussed last week that there's some congregations that feel like that the preacher should support themselves, and we can see clearly here from Paul's writing that that's not so, that the church should support the people who are out there doing the work full time. And I think here at Cerrito, not only do we pay our preacher, but we support other people who are out there doing the work. We support missionaries and things along that line that's out there and spending full time. And that way, that's our way that we get to benefit from the things that they're doing. And then he goes on to say, he talks here about somebody who plants a vineyard. So you plant a vineyard or you plant a garden or something like that. And one of the reasons you do it is so that you can reap the benefits of the things that you're planting. And anybody that's planted a garden knows that, there's a lot of work to having a garden. You just don't plant it and leave it and forget it, because if you do, you're not going to have much of a garden. You got to hoe it, you got to water it, and you got to pick the fruit and the vegetables and things at the right time. And your reward for doing that work is that you get to take advantage of and eat the food and stuff that comes out of it. And I can remember, from when I was younger, my grandmother used to plant a monstrous garden, and every year she says, "I'm not going to plant a garden that big next year." And the next year it was as big, if not bigger. But you know what? Thinking back, that stuff tastes a whole lot better than what come out of a can. And as a little kid, you got a good variety of stuff, and you liked a whole lot more food. Like I like spinach and broccoli and kale and all that stuff. And some now the kids go, I don't like that stuff. You learn to like it because that's what you're going to eat, and it just seems to taste a little bit better if you grow it yourself. But that's the reward that you get. And then he continues on here to say, that anybody that has a flock and does all the work that's necessary to have a flock, expects to get the reward from it, having the milk and all that kind of stuff. I guess maybe he's talking here about goats. I don't know that you would milk a sheep, but I know you do milk goats. And there is some work that takes place when you have a flock. You've got to make sure that they've got food to eat and things along that line. And if you do the work, then you're entitled to the reward. And there's work is a good thing, and getting the rewards from doing the work is a good thing. I think sometimes nowadays we've maybe lost that. It seems like nobody wants to work because we're giving everything away free. And when you get something free, you don't respect it quite as much, I don't think, as if you've actually worked for it. So, there's kind of a double meaning here about, the value of work plus getting the benefits from the thing that you've worked for. So I think it's clear here that, Paul is saying that he was entitled to these things. But if you go back to what we talked about last week, he didn't ask for any of that, which made that just, that much more, in my mind, special, because he could have gotten these things, but he didn't. He did the work himself and supported himself and was no burden on anybody, which just makes, in my mind, enhances the work that he did there. And even though he was entitled to it, he didn't take advantage of it. And that's kind of been the theme, through this entire chapter, is just because you can do something doesn't necessarily mean that you need to do it, and you need to have consideration for others. Of course, Paul, I think, had a very good work ethic, and he valued work. In 2 Thessalonians 3:10, he says, if any will not work, then neither let him eat. So, that's a pretty strong statement that somewhere I think has gotten lost in this day and time. But, a lot of good thoughts here, comments about that verse. All right, let's move on to verse 8. Do I speak these things after the manner of men, or saith not the law also the same? So it's not merely in accordance with human judgment to what is fitting that he's putting out here as principle, that the laborer has a right to a living wage, and there's scripture that backs that up, that that people are entitled to have the rewards for the things that they've done. And there's no higher authority than God that ordains these things. So this is not Paul's opinion. This is something that was revealed to him, and I think was pretty much common knowledge, not only among the Christians, but also among the Jews. They understood the importance of work. Comments about that verse? All right, let's move on to verse 9. For it is written in the law of Moses, thou shalt not muzzle the ox when he treadeth out the corn. Is it for the oxen that God careth? So we talked about this not too long ago when we were studying in the Old Testament. that, even an animal, God is looking out even for the animal. And that, you don't put a muzzle on the ox that's doing the work. He needs to get some of the benefits from the things that he's doing too. And from a practical standpoint, you have to feed your animals that work for you, or they're not going to be of any benefit to you. They're going to kind of just shrivel up and die. And this is something that God put in the law long before Paul started discussing these things. And this came down from God. And it just shows the love that God had, not only for man, but for all of his creation, that they be taken care of. So it's clear that God cares about everything in his creation. And he commanded the Israelites that when it comes time to have the harvest, then the ox who's done a whole lot of the work needs to benefit from the labor, its labor also, just like the human does.
If it's going to continue to work, it needs to have that sustenance that kind of treading the green and getting the refuse provides.
Right.
The same things with those who are doing the work in church. You don't give them the proper support. So discouragement's going to roll in, and just basically just have to walk away from it in those dire situations.
Right. And and I've thought about this. I've thought about this a lot from some of the the older preachers that I've come in contact with and stuff. Is they preach almost up to their dying day because that's the only support that they've got. They don't have a pension plan or anything like that. And it takes a tremendous amount of dedication to do that. And you sit in a business meeting or something like that and discuss the salary for the preacher and things along that line, and you need to God loves a cheerful giver. Well, God also loves people who give bountifully. And sometimes we maybe get ourselves in a situation where we kind of scrimp on what we pay the preacher. I mean, you got to stay within your means, but also you think about it. If we're going to draw people into to be preachers in this day and time, I mean, support is a part of it that we have to think about. Other comments about that verse. All right, let's move on to verse 10. And continuing on, he says, "Or saith he assuredly for our sake, yea, for our sake it was written, because he that ploweth ought to plow in hope, and he that thrasheth to thrash in hope of partaking." So, we work because, we're going to get a reward. And that's one of the things that keeps us working, knowing that at the end of the day, we're going to get some benefit from our, get a benefit from our work. And everything in work is not just about money. I mean, there's things that you do that you get a good feeling about. You get other rewards other than money, but work has its rewards, and sometimes that not only will we get rewards in heaven, but there's rewards for doing things here on the earth that doesn't have anything to do with money. But there's still that expectation. There's got to be something out there for a reward at the end, or just by human nature, you're not going to want to. You're not going to want to do that. And God understands that, and I think that's why He spends so much time. And there's so many things in the Bible about the importance of work and rewards and things along that line. I mean, you think about it long term. One of the reasons that we're Christians is because we want a reward in heaven, and that's the final reward. If that wasn't there, what would there be to do it other than just the good feelings and stuff that you get? There wouldn't be a reward there in the end. Right? Absolutely.
Well, Paul is saying in verse 10 and verse 11 that I'm a spiritual farmer. I have both spread seed and I have harvested.
Right.
In my work as a minister.
I mean, I think sometimes we don't give the teaching part enough credit. I hear the elders get up and talk about we need teachers and we need teachers, and nobody wants to seem to do it. I tell you what, the rewards of teaching go a whole lot further than sometimes what people think. And I was thinking about this last week. Sass had to have a procedure down in the hospital, and they had her in the bed and everything, and they sent this little teeny tiny girl up there to move her in that great big bed down this great big ramp. And I'm thinking, okay, it's going to be like NASCAR right down the ramp, and she's not going to be able to stop it. Well, the girl, she realized that she was in over her head, so she calls for another nurse, comes right in the door, one of my former students. That right there, I knew Sass was going to get really good care because that was one of my former students, and they knew me, and by then they kind of knew Sass. Get down to the Echo where they were going to do the thing. Another girl comes up to me, goes, "And your name Dave Caudill?" I said, "Yeah." She says, "You were my EMT teacher back in 1993. Two people there that I had former students. So, and there's people, I've taught fire and EMS for a long time, and all people are coming, I don't even remember, come up to me and say, yeah, I had you in class. And, and I remember when you said this, or I remember when you said that. That's the reward, and it's the same, it's the same here. And, I can relate to what Paul's saying here. Like Bill said, he gets spiritual rewards from this. Those are things that pep him up and keep him going. And then that's kind of one of the rewards of teaching, when somebody comes up to you that you had as a former student and had a good outcome, and they kind of credit you for it. It's a good thing. All right, let's move on to verse 11. If we sow into the spiritual things, it is a great matter if we shall reap your carnal things. So if we've been the means of bringing you the state of salvation by divine doctrine, which we have preached unto you, it is much for us to expect temporal support when we give ourselves to the work. So this again, he's talking here about support that we should be giving to the people who are out there doing the work, which Paul didn't particularly take advantage of. So let's move on to verse 12. If others partake of this right over you, do not ye yet more? Nevertheless, we did not use this right, but we bear all things, that we may cause no hindrance to the gospel of Christ. So, Paul said it basically here, I've ignored all these things. I haven't taken advantage of anything of yours so that you would absolutely not have any hindrance to the gospel. Paul was not a burden in any way, shape, or form. As a matter of fact, he enhanced the things that were going on there at the church in Corinth, and he was just kind of reminding them of this, that he had the right to a lot of things that he didn't take advantage of because he was thinking of them and the things that the problems that it might cause if he would have insisted on those things. So he kind of sums it all up here that they got the benefit of all the things that Paul did, and they didn't have one red cent in it. Paul bared all the cost himself, so that there wouldn't be a problem. He had the right to it, but he refused to do it. Just like people have the right to do things that's not a problem, but they don't do it for the benefit of others, so that others won't have the stumbling block. So this is the same theme that he's used pretty much all the way through the chapter here.
There are, although he doesn't say who's speaking, a lot of the scholarship kind of points that he's talking about Peter and maybe Apollos. Apollos was one of those workers who was doing the work, and was being well supported, apparently.
Right. But you got to kind of think, from what little bit is said about Apollos, he has an ego. And so that might be part of it. And I'm sure that there was, you kind of read between the lines, there was maybe a little bit of friction between Paul and Peter. to say the least. All right, let's look at verse 13. Know ye not that they that minister about sacred things eat of things of the temple, and they wait upon the altar, have their portion with the altar. So, this kind of goes back to the Old Testament. I think here he's talking to the Jews a little bit and kind of reminding them that under the old law, the priest had rights to some of the things that were sacrificed on the altar. And for their physical support and well-being, they had their portion of what they could use, and also kind of reminded them also is, hey, if you'll remember, under the old law, the Levites had to be supported because they had no inheritance, and it was the duty of the rest of the tribes to make sure that the Levites had their support, not just in things to eat, but other things, that they needed, housing and clothing and things along that line. And they didn't do a whole lot of complaining about that. But now, they're kind of, looking at it a little bit different. And then maybe some of that, though, was the influence that the Gentiles had upon the Jews. So, Paul's just kind of reminding them of some of the things that in the past that really, in a lot of ways, things haven't changed. They just kind of moved to a little different way of looking at things. Comments about that verse? All right, let's go on to verse 14. Even so did the Lord ordain that they that proclaim the gospel should live of the gospel. So again, he's saying, the priest that ministered about the holy things lived, and gifts were made at the altar, and they were supported by that, and also by the support that was given by the children of Israel. So he's saying here, that the church needs to think about that and support the ones who are proclaiming the gospel. And a failure to support the work of the church is going to let the teachers suffer. That's part of the work of the church, is to support the ones who are doing the teaching. And if there's nobody there to do the teaching, or there's nobody there to lead, the church is just going to go away. Because if you don't have preaching and you don't have leadership, then things are going to be complete chaos, and people are going to go, heck with this. We're not going to be around this type of thing. Comments about that verse, Bill?
Well, that goes all the way back to what Jesus said to the 70 back in Luke 10, and of course the verse 7 is the crust of it. He said, remember, remain in the same house, eating and drinking such things as they give you, for the laborer is worthy of his wages. Do not go from house to house. And of course, he talked about at verse 4, carry neither money bag, knapsack, nor sandals, and greet no one along the road. In other words, don't beg on the road.
That's right. Don't panhandle. So, how could you get any better authority for what Paul's saying here than right out of the mouth of Jesus? So there's where the crux of it is. All right, let's look at verse 15. But I have used none of these things, and I write not these things that it may be so done in my case, for it were good for me rather to die than that any man should make my glorifying void. So, he's not doing this for his benefit. He's doing this for other people's benefit who are going to come after him. And, he's saying, look, don't send me this stuff now. This is not going to, it's not going to benefit me. These things are written for, basically for the future. And he's not doing it for his glory. He's doing it pretty much for the glory of God. Comments about that?
I think it's troubling sometimes when we see these young men come out of these preaching schools, especially.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of them have to go into smaller congregations.
Mm-hmm.
They can't afford it.
Right.
And sometimes they have to work side jobs, which takes away from their ministry duties. But it's not a shame to have to do that.
Right. And there's a lot of preachers over the years that's done that. I think about my grandfather grew up in Boone County, and there was a preacher down in that area, Lincoln County, Boone County. His name was Vernon Mullins, and he established I don't know how many churches in that area, and he sold Electrolux vacuum cleaners. He was the Electrolux man, and I mean, he did that until he retired from. But I mean, he went and like I said, established all kinds. And there's lots of preachers that did that. That they had another job, and I mean, that's dedication. That's dedication. And you're right. I mean, I can remember when one of the papers that we used to get Gospel Advocate or something like that, it'd have a little job stealing in the back of it. It would talk about, you're going to have some support because we can't afford to support you, that type of deal. And you're right. A lot of the people, and that's got to be discouraging to those men. It really does.
They can win the secular world and make a good living.
Right.
But if they want to preach the gospel, then you've got to be,
Sadly, you see that in the back of the West Virginia Christian sometimes too, with these smaller congregations. They only support so much. And Paul, obviously, he worked and supported himself in Corinth, but you got to remember also he did it in Thessalonica.
It was pretty much his practice almost everywhere.
In 2 Thessalonians 3:8, he says, "Nor do we eat anyone's bread free of charge, but work with labor and toil night and day, that we might not be a burden to any of you."
Right. Pretty almost word for word what he said here. All right, let's look at verse 16. "For if I preach the gospel, I have nothing to glory of, for the necessity is laid upon me, for woe is unto me if I preach not the gospel." You think about Paul's situation. He got a direct charge from God. Jesus appeared to him on the road to Damascus and gave him his charge. And if anything would strike the fear of God into you, I think that would. And I think that Paul was so committed to this that he just this was his entire life, and to not do it would be worse than anything else that could happen to him while he was doing it. And again, that's pretty good dedication. There was nothing that you could do to him that was going to be worse than not letting him preach the gospel. And you think about when he was in captivity at Rome, he still had some productive time, and of course, obviously, he used it to write letters and stuff like that. But that had to be really frustrating to him. He wasn't out there, doing what his mission was. And that speaks well of Paul. And we know from the gospel, Paul put up with a lot of things to do what he did. I mean, they almost killed him several times. He was shipwrecked. He was beaten. I mean, you have to kind of wonder, would we have that kind of dedication if we were in that situation? Other comments about that? All right, let's move on to verse 17. "For if I do this of my own will, I have a reward. But if not of mine own will, I have a stewardship entrusted to me." So, Paul didn't start out to be an apostle. Paul was persecuting the church, and he had a good conscience about doing that. He thought he was doing the right thing, but he wasn't doing the right thing, and it didn't start out to be his own will, but it became his own will. So not only did he get going to receive a reward in heaven, but he also got the rewards of doing the job. And just like we talked about before, doing things like this has rewards other than money and things along that line. And really, that was a very important stewardship that was entrusted to him. That his mission was to preach the gospel, and it's a good thing to save somebody's life in our world, but it's even a better thing to save somebody's life eternally. And that's kind of the good feeling that you have, or that Paul would have, knowing that he has put somebody on the path toward eternal salvation. And that would be a good feeling to have.
Well, I kind of goes back to what you said a little bit about the teacher and the word of teach. Jimmy and I sat, for years taught fourth, fifth, and sixth grade. I can look around this audience right here and see kids, people that we had years and years ago, and think that we had a small part
Right.
in that. And same with teachers in the secular world. Even Diane got in place to go, and kids from way back come up to her, and even Jamie's the same way now. She's been in for several years. We got someplace that kids she had 3, 4, 5 years ago. So there is that.
Absolutely, and you really don't think about it sometimes when you're doing it. At the last election, I was standing there, signing in to vote, and this kid looked up at me. He goes, "Aren't you the Mr. Caudill that used to do those PowerPoints at Cerrito Elementary?" And I said, "Yeah." He says, "You know what?" He says, "I never will forget that one you did on Pearl Harbor. I thought that was the neatest thing." And he said, "I've just been fascinated about that ever since." Planted that little seed, and you just never know all the good things. And a lot of times you don't see the good things that happen to it. You can make an impact. That's right. All right, let's get on with verse 18. "What then is my reward? That when I preach the gospel, I may make the gospel without charge, so as not to use to the full of my right of the gospel." So he just, again, summing this up again. He gets other rewards out of this deal, but one of the things that he's not going to do is make it a burden on somebody else to do it. To kind of sum up what he's doing in these verses. And then in verse 19 he goes on to say, "For though I was free from all men, I brought myself under bondage to all that I might gain the more." So he was free to do whatever he wanted to do. Paul was a free moral agent just like anybody else is, but he made the commitment to put himself in this situation and to serve all of these other people. And he understood that because he did that, in the end, he was going to gain a whole lot more than he could ever hope for in this earth.
This is a little jump ahead, but in verse 33, chapter 10, he wrote that, "Just as I also please all men in all things, not seeking my own profit, but the profit of many, that they may be saved."
Right. And then he starts to deep dive into this a little bit more in verse 20. And he says, "And to the Jews I became as a Jew, that I might gain Jews. To them that are under the law, as under the law, not being myself under the law, that I might gain them that are under the law." So basically, Paul completely understood the mindset of the Jews, because Paul grew up a Jew. He was a Pharisee. Paul had a very, very fine education. I mean, probably in today's terms, it was like going to Harvard or Yale, the education that he had. I mean, he had a fantastic education, and he understood all the things and had a thorough understanding of the law of Moses, and he knew how the Jews thought, and he used that knowledge that he had to make sure that he was doing everything to make the Jews comfortable, that they would make the conversion over to Christ. Even to the point we talk about this in Acts. When Timothy started with him, he had Timothy circumcised, because that was a huge thing with the Jews. Under the gospel, that's not an issue, but it was an issue to the Jews. It was a stumbling block. And the best way to remove that stumbling block was, for Timothy to be circumcised. So, there's that mindset there that, they couldn't go back and say, well, you didn't do this and you didn't do that. He talked about in Acts, the 21st chapter, verses 20 through 26, he talked about, when he would go into the temple, he would purify himself. purify ourselves before we walk in here into the auditorium. That's not part of the New Testament plan, but it was a part of the old plan. Was there anything wrong with him purifying himself before he goes into the temple? No, there wasn't. Did he have to do it? No, he didn't have to do it, but he did do it because he understood that could have been a stumbling block for the Jews. So, he thought about all of the things that was important to the Jews that didn't make any difference in the church, and he kind of adhered to those things. Now, he didn't compromise the gospel. If it was something that was contrary to the gospel, he stood like a rock. But stuff that didn't make any difference, so what if he had to take a little bit of time to purify himself, or do some of these things? If it would make it easier for him to convert a Jew, that's what he would do, and that's a pretty good thing to say. So he wouldn't concede he would concede a point in a matter of indifference, but he wouldn't concede a point in something that had to do with the moral or the spiritual obligation that he had, or the things that would be contrary to the gospel. Comments about that verse? All right, let's look at verse 21. To them that are without the law, as without law, not being without the law of God, but under the law to Christ, that I might gain them that are without law. So basically what he's doing here, he's talking about the Gentiles. Okay? Not meaning that they're not under the law. Everybody is under the law of Christ, whether they know it or not. God's law is universal. But back in that time, these Gentiles were worshiping all kinds of other gods, so they had no idea that they were under God's law. But basically, he's talking about here the Gentile, and he's going to do the things that is important to them that are indifferent, so that he's going to be able to convert them. If there was something that that they thought was really important, that was a matter of opinion, he had no problem with doing those things, as long as it didn't compromise the gospel, and that would assist him in doing the things that he needed to do to convert those people to the gospel. Because a lot of them, they were not willing to do the things that that needed to be done, and he was going to have to do some things to kind of push them in the right direction, so that until they did see the light.
Examples in Acts, obviously the most obvious example is Athens, where he talked to so many those without law.
Mm-hmm.
Lystra was another place that
And and he talked about their gods and showed how they remember talked about the unknown God. Said, here I'm the one representing the unknown God here that you guys aren't worshiping.
His willingness to meet people halfway. He was very mindful and thoughtful about the way he conversed with his audience. You could always meet them halfway. To me, it's like the modern day equivalent of like wearing a mask if somebody else is wearing a mask. You don't have to, but it's they're mindful of it, so I think it's important too.
Right. And that's a good.
very, very much like Jesus. I mean, Jesus did the same.
Right. But the thing we got to keep in mind about the whole thing, it's not compromising the gospel. If it's a matter of opinion, it's a matter of opinion. But if it's a matter of fact, then it's a matter of fact. So I'm going to stop right here, and we'll pick up with verse 22 next week, and kind of finish this thought up, and then go into a kind of a new thought that I think is kind of interesting. So I appreciate everybody's attention and comments today.